Bang, bang, bang! The Robertsons thought they'd hit debris, but it wasn't wreckage. It was killer whales, slamming their boat in the middle of the Pacific. Within minutes, their schooner Lucette was gone. A family of 5 and a young deckhand were left adrift in a tiny dinghy, with almost nothing but the will to survive. The first blow shook the Lucette like an earthquake. Then came another. Bang, bang, bang! Douglas Robertson, just 17, froze as the deck beneath him buckled. His mother, Lynn, screamed. His father, Dougal, shouted orders no one could process. Through the spray and chaos, black and white shapes surged past the hull. Killer whales. Not just one. A pod. They circled and rammed again and again, the force splitting planks, splintering beams, driving seawater through the cabin floor. In seconds, their world, their floating home, was breaking apart. The schooner they had trusted to carry them across the world was being torn open like paper. Douglas would later remember the sound more than anything else. There was a bang, 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 and then silence, except for the roar of water. But silence didn't mean safety. The Lucette was sinking, fast. The family's dream voyage had turned into a nightmare, and within minutes, the Robertsons, parents, children, and their young deckhand, would be fighting for their very lives in the endless Pacific. Long before the killer whales came, the Robertson family was chasing a dream. Dougal Robertson, a former British merchant navy officer, was restless. Tired of the grind of post-war England, he wanted something more for his family. Adventure, freedom, and a life lived on their own terms. His wife, Lynn, was supportive, though she knew what it would mean. Pulling their children from school, selling almost everything they owned, and trusting their future to the sea. Their vessel was the Lucette, a sturdy 43-foot wooden schooner. To most, she was modest. To the Robertsons, she was a floating home, a ticket to escape, and the start of a story worth telling. Aboard were their children, Douglas, 17, sharp and observant. Twin boys, Neil and Sandy, just 9 years old, brimming with curiosity. And their teenage daughter Anne, still finding her place in the world. Along with them came Robin Williams, a 22-year-old student deckhand eager to learn the ropes of life at sea. For weeks, life on the Lucette felt like an adventure novel brought to life. They sailed out of England, past the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, and into the vast blue expanse of the Pacific. Days were filled with lessons. The children were homeschooled aboard, learning mathematics alongside navigation, biology alongside fishing. Nights were quieter, with the stars stretching endlessly overhead, reminding them that they were truly small against the immensity of the ocean. But beneath that dream was a fragility. Wooden boats leak, supplies dwindle, tempers flare in cramped quarters. And out there, in the deep ocean, there are no neighbors, no hospitals, no lifelines. Only the sea and what it decides to give or take. This was not a family on holiday. This was a family daring to live differently, daring to test themselves against the elements. And it was precisely that daring that would put them in the path of one of the most terrifying ocean ordeals ever recorded. For soon, their beloved Lucette, their home, their lifeline, their dream, would be tested not by storm or reef, but by predators no one expected. The Lucette cut through the Pacific like a ghost, sails full, water foaming along her bow, carrying 6 souls into the unknown. For the Robertsons, this was not just a voyage. It was a test of everything. Their courage, their unity, their faith in a fragile wooden hull to stand between them and the abyss. Mornings came bright and sharp, the sky stretching cloudless over a sea so endless it seemed alive. The twins chased flying fish across the deck, their laughter carried by the wind. Douglas worked beside his father, learning the rhythms of sail and rigging, the weight of responsibility falling heavy on his young shoulders. Lynn cooked simple meals in the galley, onions, biscuits, fruit, all stored with meticulous care. Anne read books by lantern light, sometimes gazing out at the dark horizon as if she could already sense the storm that was coming. But life aboard a schooner was no paradise. The Pacific was merciless. Sweltering heat baked them by day. Nights chilled their bones. Fresh water was rationed. Meals grew monotonous. Salt stung every wound, every blister. Yet there was pride too, a defiant sense that they were not tourists, but true mariners shaping their own destiny. Then came the moments of awe. Dolphins racing in silver arcs alongside the hull, whales surfacing in the distance, their breaths echoing across the still sea. Constellations so clear at night they felt close enough to touch. For the children, it was an education no classroom could match. For Dougal, it was vindication. Proof he had been right to rip his family from the predictability of suburban life. But in the silence between waves, there were darker thoughts. The Pacific was not empty. It was alive, and sometimes hostile. Stories drifted from sailor to sailor about rogue waves, sudden storms, drifting derelicts, and creatures that ruled the deep. Killer whales, sharks, silent shadows that could appear without warning. The Robertsons pushed such thoughts aside. They had to. Their voyage was their dream. Yet in truth, they were sailing blind into the unknown, unaware that something unimaginable, something no sailor could prepare for, was waiting out there. Because not far from their path, predators were gathering, and they were about to make the Lucette their target. It was just after noon when the Pacific turned violent. Douglas Robertson would never forget the sound. Bang, bang, bang. The deck shuddered as though struck by a hammer. The Lucette, their trusted schooner, lurched sideways, wood groaning, beams cracking. At first they thought it was debris. Then the sea split open. A massive black and white body surged alongside. An orca, and then another, and another. The pod had found them. The whales rammed the Lucette again, their blunt heads striking with terrifying precision. The hull shuddered with every impact, seams splitting, seawater pouring in. "They're sinking us!" Dougal roared, disbelief mixing with fury. Lynn clutched the twins as water sloshed across the deck, her eyes wide with terror. One orca rose beside the hull, close enough for Douglas to see its gleaming eye. Intelligent, unblinking, almost deliberate. Then it crashed back into the boat with explosive force. The schooner didn't stand a chance. Planks tore free like matchsticks. Nails screamed loose, the deck tilted. Below, the cabin filled with water, books and supplies floating up like debris in a flood. In minutes, their floating world was disintegrating. The children screamed. The dinghy, their only lifeline, was still lashed to the deck. Douglas and Robin slashed at the ropes with frantic hands, trying to free it as seawater poured higher. Dougal shouted over the chaos, "Get to the raft, now!" And just like that, the Lucette was gone. The boat that had carried them thousands of miles was sinking into the black, pulled under by the very ocean it was built to conquer. Behind them, the orcas circled, silent now, watching. Their work was done. The Robertsons were no longer sailors. They were castaways, clinging to rubber and desperation in the middle of the Pacific. A dream voyage had become a nightmare in less than 10 minutes. And the fight for survival was only beginning. The Lucette was going down fast. The sea clawed at her decks, dragging planks and masts into the abyss. For the Robertsons, there was no time for grief, no time to mourn their shattered home. Survival depended on one thing, getting off the sinking schooner before it swallowed them whole. Douglas and Robin hacked furiously at the ropes binding the dinghy. Their hands bled, blades slipping on wet cordage. Each second felt like a countdown to death. "Cut faster!" Dougal shouted, his voice breaking with urgency. Water surged up to their knees, sweeping gear, food, and memories into the void. The inflatable life raft was flung overboard, half inflated, bouncing on the swells. The twins cried as Lynn shoved them toward it, her arms trembling but unyielding. "Go!" she ordered, her voice cracking. She knew one misstep could send them into the maw of the sea. Finally, the dinghy came free. The family and their young deckhand leapt into the rubber lifelines just as the Lucette gave a final groan and slipped beneath the waves. Silence followed. Eerie. Absolute. Their home was gone. Nothing left but splinters and foam. The Robertsons looked around. Ocean. Nothing but ocean. The horizon was a circle of emptiness, stretching in every direction. The pod of orcas had vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving behind a sea as calm and indifferent as if nothing had happened. In their dinghy, just 9 feet long, they took stock. A few onions, some biscuits, a bit of fruit. Water for maybe 10 days, a knife. A few odds and ends salvaged in the chaos. That was all. For a family of 5, plus a deckhand, in the middle of the Pacific. As the sun set that night, painting the sky crimson, the reality settled in. They weren't sailors anymore. They were castaways, and the Pacific Ocean had just become their prison. Their ordeal was no longer about exploration. It was about survival. The Pacific swallowed the Lucette whole and left the Robertsons floating on scraps of rubber and hope. Day 1. The shock was still fresh. The family sat huddled in the 9-foot dinghy, the raft tethered nearby. The children whispered questions no parent should have to answer. When will we be rescued? Dougal gave the only answer he could. Soon. But in his gut, he knew the truth. They were 200 miles west of the Galapagos. A rescue wasn't coming. Not soon. Maybe not ever. The supplies were pitiful. A handful of onions, a bag of biscuits, some fruit. Fresh water. Just enough for 10 days if carefully rationed. For 6 people. 6. Already the Pacific sun was merciless, beating down on their exposed skin, turning lips to paper and throats to sand. Nights brought no comfort. The sea stretched infinite and black, waves rocking the dinghy like a cruel lullaby. The children cried themselves to sleep, the salt air filling their lungs as hunger gnawed and fear took root. Beneath them, the ocean was alive. Sharks circling, shadows brushing the raft. Every splash, every movement carried the same terrifying question. What if it's coming for us? The dinghy was too small. Their bodies pressed against each other, salt sores forming on their skin, legs cramping. Space to move was a luxury they no longer had. The twins began asking for food by day 3, but Lynn could only ration out crumbs. A biscuit divided into 6, a sliver of onion to keep their mouths working. It was survival in its cruelest form. Rainwater became salvation. They stretched plastic sheets, catching droplets whenever clouds passed. They prayed for storms, prayed for gray skies. Some days the heavens delivered. Other days, the sun burned relentlessly, mocking their thirst. Dougal's logbook notes from those first weeks capture the spiral. Children weak, water low, no sight of ships, morale crumbling. Each entry was both a record and a plea to the universe. But somehow they kept going, hour by hour, wave by wave. Because out here, surrender wasn't an option. To give up meant death, and even the youngest among them seemed to understand. They were trapped in a test of endurance against the endless sea. 37 days lay ahead. They didn't know it yet, but the worst was still to come. The ocean is a slow executioner. Days bled into weeks, and the meager supplies vanished. The biscuits were crumbs, the fruit, long gone. The onions, once their lifeline, had rotted into mush. Now the Robertsons were left with nothing but salt water stretching endlessly in every direction, and the raw ache of starvation hollowing them out from within. Lynn's face grew gaunt, her hands trembling as she tried to comfort the twins, who cried out in whispers, too weak to scream. Robin, just 18, stared blankly at the horizon, his ribs showing beneath blistered skin. Douglas wrote later, "It felt like we were fading, piece by piece, into the sea." Desperation forced choices no family should face. When a turtle surfaced near the raft, Dougal lunged with a knife, killing it. What followed was primal. They drank its blood, thick and metallic, just to wet their tongues. They tore strips of raw flesh with shaking hands, gagging as they forced it down. The children turned away at first, but hunger won. Survival demanded it. Sharks circled constantly, dark shadows beneath their fragile craft, waiting for weakness. Once, a hammerhead struck at the dinghy, its jaws ripping a piece of rubber. They beat it back with oars, hearts racing. Certain death was seconds away. Even the act of fishing became a battle. They caught flying fish with their bare hands when the creatures leapt into the raft at night. Raw, slippery, slimy. They ate them whole. It was grotesque, but it kept them alive. Every day became a cycle of pain, lips cracking open from dehydration, skin burning and peeling from the sun, stomachs twisting in empty spasms. Their minds frayed. Hallucinations set in, the horizon blurring with phantom ships and imagined voices. Still, Dougal clung to routine, forcing the family to keep a log, to ration whatever came from the sky or sea. He knew discipline was their only defense against madness. But at night, when the children slept, Lynn and Dougal whispered in the dark, "How much longer can we last?" The Pacific had already taken their boat. It was now trying to take their humanity. The sea was never empty. Even when the horizon lay still and the sky blazed blue, there was movement beneath. Dark shapes circling, tails slicing silently through the water. The sharks had found them. At first, they hovered at a distance, curious, their dorsal fins breaking the surface like warning knives. But soon, they came closer, brushing the rubber of the dinghy, bumping it, testing it. Each contact sent a shiver through the raft, as though the ocean itself wanted to swallow them whole. The Robertsons had nowhere to go, no protection, just flimsy rubber and thin wooden oars. One night, as the family tried to sleep, a hammerhead struck with sudden violence, ramming the dinghy hard enough to knock them off balance. The raft jolted, water sloshing in, the children screaming in terror. Lynn clutched the twins to her chest while Dougal and Douglas beat at the water with paddles, praying the rubber wouldn't tear open. Another time, a sleek shadow rushed the raft and snapped at a dangling hand. Only quick reflexes saved Robin from losing his fingers. His hand came back shredded with scrapes, and the message was clear. The sharks were patient. They were waiting. For days, the predators shadowed them, circling tighter, as if the family was already marked. Every splash, a fin, every ripple, a body brushing too close. The psychological torture was unbearable. To close your eyes meant to dream of teeth. To open them meant to see the ocean's executioners, biding their time. Douglas later wrote, "The sharks taught us what it means to feel hunted. Even food became dangerous. When Dougal speared a turtle and lashed its remains overboard, the sea erupted in a frenzy of thrashing bodies and snapping jaws. Blood frothed the water red. The raft rocked violently as sharks tore each other apart inches away. For the Robertsons, it was a chilling reminder. This was their future if they made a single mistake. Yet somehow, they endured. They patched the raft, stayed still, and kept paddles close. Survival demanded silence and vigilance. In the vastness of the Pacific, predators had chosen them as prey. And every night, as the stars wheeled above, the family whispered the same unspoken question. How long before the sharks claimed us too? By the third week adrift, survival had stripped the Robertsons down to ghosts of themselves. Their bodies were ravaged, lips cracked open, salt sores festering, ribs jutting sharp beneath blistered skin. The children no longer cried. They only stared, eyes hollow, too weak to waste tears. Even the act of speaking was a burden. Words rasped like sandpaper. Every day blurred into a nightmare routine. Hunt, ration, pray. The rain, when it came, was salvation. The family spread their tongues to the sky, desperate for drops. But when the heavens stayed empty, madness crept in. Hallucinations haunted them. Ships shimmering on the horizon, voices calling from nowhere. Hope dangled and disappeared like a cruel mirage. Food ran dry again. They were forced to cut strips of leather from the dinghy and chew it for the faint illusion of fullness. Douglas, just 17, wrote later, "I thought of nothing but food. The ache never stopped. I dreamed of feasts and woke to emptiness." Lynn's strength was ebbing. She clung to the twins, whispering lullabies even as her own body trembled. Dougal tried to stay defiant, ordering them to keep the log, to maintain discipline. But the cracks were showing. His voice shook. His eyes lingered too long on the endless sea. One evening, Douglas watched his father sit silently, staring at the water with a knife in hand. He knew then. The line between hope and surrender had thinned to breaking. And yet, somehow, the family endured. Each sunrise was another miracle. Each night survived was proof of their will. But inside, they all felt the same truth gnawing at them. The Pacific was winning. They had survived the orcas. They had endured sharks. But now, starvation and despair were enemies more merciless than any predator. How much longer could the human spirit fight against a world determined to erase them? By day 37, the Robertsons were no longer a family at sea. They were survivors suspended between life and death. Their raft was a ruin, sun-bleached and half-collapsed. The dinghy's rubber seams leaked constantly, forcing endless bailing. The air stank of sweat, salt, and decay. Their skin was cracked raw, their bodies skeletal. The children, once playful twins, lay silent, conserving every ounce of energy. Lynn's lullabies had faded into whispers of prayer. They had eaten everything edible. Turtle blood, raw fish, even the stomach linings of seabirds caught in desperation. Yet still the hunger clawed at them. Their bellies cramped, their minds drifted. Some nights, they hallucinated rescue. Lights on the horizon, a ship's horn, salvation just beyond reach, only to wake to the same endless blue. Douglas would later write that the sea itself became their greatest tormentor. It gave us nothing. It watched us die slowly. Every sunrise felt like a final judgment, and by that 37th day, none of them expected to see another. But then, a sound. Unmistakable. A distant engine. The grind of machinery against water. At first, they thought it was another cruel trick of the mind. But no. The silhouette grew clearer. A Japanese fishing vessel. Real. Approaching. Frantic, the family waved arms, shouted, lifted rags into the sky. Hope surged. Painful. Almost unbearable. And then the boat slowed. Men appeared at the rail. They had been seen. For the Robertsons, it was the moment life returned. 37 days of terror and torment, and at last, salvation. The fishing vessel towered above the tiny raft, a steel giant against their fragile scrap of rubber. For a moment, the Robertsons could only stare, afraid it might vanish like every other hallucination. But then came the voices, urgent, foreign, shouting across the waves. Real men, real salvation. Strong arms reached down, pulling the family aboard one by one. Lynn clutched the twins so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if she feared the ocean would snatch them back. Douglas collapsed on the deck, too weak to stand, the hard metal floor feeling like heaven beneath his broken body. Dougal, the stoic captain who had held them together, finally broke. His face crumpled, and tears ran freely. 37 days of defiance, and at last he let himself weep. The fishermen stood stunned. Before them were not sailors, but skeletons, blistered, starved, eyes sunken deep into their skulls. They fed them water slowly, carefully, fearing the shock of sudden nourishment might kill them. The children sipped from tiny cups as if tasting life itself. For the first time in weeks, the Robertsons were no longer fighting the sea. They were safe, and the Pacific, vast and merciless, had lost. When the Robertsons stepped onto solid land, they were unrecognizable. Thin, weathered, burned by sun and salt. Survivors, not sailors. Doctors were astonished they had endured. 37 days without proper food or water should have been a death sentence. Yet here they stood, living proof of human resilience. News of their ordeal spread across the world. A family devoured by orcas, cast adrift on the Pacific, surviving on turtle blood and rainwater. It was the stuff of nightmares, and yet entirely true. Newspapers hailed it as one of the greatest sea survival stories ever told. But for the Robertsons, there was no glory. There was trauma. The twins suffered night terrors, waking screaming from dreams of sharks circling the raft. Lynn could not close her eyes without hearing the echo of waves slapping rubber. Dougal, who had once sought adventure, carried the weight of guilt. That he had brought his family into the jaws of the ocean and barely led them out. Douglas, the teenager who had fought to keep the raft afloat, put pen to paper. His account, Survive the Savage Sea, became a beacon, not just a record of tragedy, but a testament to endurance. The Orcas had sunk their boat. The Pacific had tried to erase them. But the Robertson family endured. Their story would not be swallowed by the sea. The Robertson ordeal was more than a survival story. It was a brutal education in the unforgiving law of nature. The orcas that sank Lucette were never malicious. They were curious, perhaps mistaking the wooden hull for prey. But curiosity from a predator of that size can be catastrophic. In minutes, a dream voyage became a fight for life, a reminder that humans are fragile visitors in the ocean, never its masters. The Pacific delivered its lessons without mercy. The family learned to drink rainwater drop by drop, to value a single onion as treasure, to kill for survival when turtles and seabirds drifted too close. They learned what it meant to watch children starve, to ration hope as carefully as food. To sailors, the Robertsons story became a cautionary tale. Never underestimate the sea, never trust chance, and never believe preparation makes you invincible. To the wider world, it was proof of human resilience, that even when stripped to the bone, when death circles on all sides, the will to live can burn brighter than fear. The ocean gave them 37 days of torment, but it also gave them the strength to endure. The Robertson family's survival became more than a story. It became legend. Their 37 days adrift were retold in headlines, in classrooms, and in survival manuals across the world. Survive the Savage Sea, written by Douglas, wasn't just a memoir. It was a blueprint of endurance, studied by sailors, explorers, even soldiers preparing for the worst. But their legacy is not found only in pages of a book. It lives in the image of a mother protecting her children against impossible odds, in a father refusing to surrender to the sea, in children learning that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to fight through it. The Pacific had tried to erase them, to scatter them into nothing. Instead, it carved them into symbols of resilience. Their story is whispered by sailors before long voyages, and by survivors who know what it means to stare death in the face and endure. The Orcas sank Lucette. The ocean swallowed their world, but the Robertsons refused to vanish. Their name belongs now to survival history, a family that faced the savage sea and lived to tell it. The Robertsons' fight for survival stands as one of the most extraordinary sagas ever recorded at sea. A family torn from their boat by orcas, left adrift in an endless ocean. And yet, they endured. If stories like this move you, of courage, tragedy, and the raw power of nature, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because our next story takes you into another nightmare, one you won't believe until you hear it.